Hello, everyone. My name is Nader Shams, and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy at the Skoll Foundation. I'm excited to welcome you to the Skoll World Forum session, Elephant in the Room, Funder Government Power Dynamics. This year, the forum's theme is Closing the Distance. We thought there was no better way to reflect the theme than to invite our global network to design and build a new kind of event together. In particular, within the Skoll Foundation, we are excited for this session as we continue to explore public sector resource flows and the potential role for philanthropy. While Skoll has and continues to engage with government funders via various channels, we recognize there still is a big need to better understand how we can continue to work together towards ultimate systems change that betters livelihoods. If the social sector has learned anything over the last several decades of big D development, it is that scaling solutions must meet the massive size of the problems we face, especially if we are to have a truly sustainable impact on systems. So finally, some logistic items I want to share just before we begin. First, this session is being recorded and will be released publicly after the event. Please feel free to use the chat when it is available to engage with each other and ask questions of the speakers. The session is scheduled to end in 90 minutes. After the session, please take a few seconds to complete the survey and the poll that we will share and hop in to the right of your browser. On social media, we're using the hashtag SkollWF, and we'd love for you to do the same. So we are thrilled to be able to include this session in this year's Skoll Virtual World Forum, and want to extend a special thank you to VillageReach and emerging public leaders for proposing and designing it. With that, I'd like to introduce and pass the mic on to Dean Nairi Woods. Nairi, over to you.
Well, hello, I am delighted to be back at this year's Skoll Forum. I'm always struck in this forum by the fantastic positive energy of all the participants, bursting with ideas, impatient with all the old ways of doing things, dying to jump in and get going, or to quote the Skoll Forum strapline, to come together to accelerate innovative solutions to the world's most pressing problems. It's all the more reason why this panel today is so important, because the funders, the entrepreneurs among you bring three things to the world's problems that are desperately needed: resources, innovation, and a single focus on a problem that really matters to you. But what governments have is equally important to the problems the world is facing, because governments have scale, a capacity to reach all people. They have legitimacy, they have the consent of the governed. And finally, they have the capacity to settle trade-offs. If we focus on just the problem that you are most passionate about, and we neglect others, who is it that wins from that, and who is it that loses from that? And is that just? Who decides whether that's just or not? So our challenge today is to probe how you can get the best of both worlds. How do we get the resources, innovation, energy, and single focus of the funders and entrepreneurs among you to combine in the best possible way with the scale, the legitimacy, the capacity of government to make those trade-offs? That's our challenge. We're going to find the magic space by turning to some fantastic panelists. But before we do that, I would just like to ask you, and I'm going to make sure that I've got a view of all of you on my screen here. I've got three questions for all of you in the audience. And what I'd love you to do is literally to do this as your answer. Let's not faff around with technology here. I just want you to put your hand right in front of the screen, which is your way of saying yes. So who among you has spent most of their life working in government or works in government? Might you put your hand, sorry, somebody's on, somebody needs to mute there. Very sorry to silence anybody. Right, so how many of you actually work in government? Hand forward if you work in government, like this. Do we have anyone with us today who works in government? I'm looking across my screen and I can see one hand. Look at that. So two hands, yay. Another hand just appeared. Okay, so on the whole, this is a meeting of the entrepreneurs, the funders, and those who are working outside of government. Second question, how many of you think that you need to work closely with government to succeed? So hand up, let's have a look. That's everyone, just about everyone on my first screen, just about everybody on my second screen, almost everybody. Kathy doesn't think she needs to work with government. I spotted her. Zaya's wondering. Laura has just put her hand up. Okay, so Russia doesn't think she does. So she's like just smiling. Ah, she does. Look at that. So Roland, you don't need to work with government to succeed. Yes, he does. Look at that. Look, pretty much sounds like we've got 100% of people here just about thinking that they need to work closely with government to succeed. So let me now ask you a different question. How many of you think that you are easy for governments to work with? That you or your organization is easy for governments to work with? How easy is your organization for a government to partner with? So some of you, just scrolling across my screen here, it's just, by the way, it's so lovely to see you all. Hi. But yeah, so that's a lot of you. So a lot of you think you're doing pretty well. Well, we'll come back to that because it'll be really fun to hear your reflections after hearing from today's panelists on many of whom are sitting or have sat right in the seat of government and are going to share with us what some of the challenges look like when you're in government and you're trying to work with a funder or an entrepreneur or a philanthropist. So let's start with Minister Malado Kaba. So you were the former finance minister in Guinea, the first woman in that role. It deserves underlining. And you played an incredible role, Malado, in setting fiscal transparency and addressing corruption. And sitting as Minister of Finance, you were constantly there between partners, government, outside external agencies, government priorities. So what did it feel like as finance minister? Did it feel as though the funders, the development partners, the philanthropists were playing too big a role in shaping your agenda?
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks to the Skoll Foundation, Emerging Public Leaders, and VillageReach for organizing this very interesting discussion. Well, you know, I believe that sometimes funders can play too big a role, but only if you let them do so. You know, I've had also the opportunity to work for more than 15 years with major development partners. I remember hearing, you know, some of them talking about, you know, how they could buy themselves a seat at the table of both strategy and policy discussions because they were coming with big money, a lot of skills. And my position at that time, and I haven't changed in more than 2 decades, remains the same. Governments is and needs to be in the driver's seat. As funders, what I valued as a finance minister, but also what I valued as working for development partners was the following. Funders need to stay in their advisory role because that's what they can do best. They also are excellent providers of specific skills when we need them. They also have this ability to broker invaluable information for us in government. You know, when we were looking for instance, solutions that were successfully tested elsewhere, they can do that very well because they are based elsewhere in other regions of the world. And lastly, they are also able to provide us with, they facilitate cooperation between countries and also facilitating sharing of experience between countries. Now, coming back to your question, you know, I think it's important when you sit in government and to probably I don't know if there are many people here from the public administrations, but one of my advice is that when you feel that a funder or a social entrepreneur or an NGO doesn't really meet your need, you need to exercise the power to say no. I have a very vivid example. You know, when I was when I came to office as a finance minister, I had to deal with the disastrous audit outcomes that my predecessor carried out, and I finalized this audit. We released the outcomes, and I quickly set my teams to develop an action plan to address the many challenges that our public procurement systems was facing. And so we were many months down the line. we were, in full implementation mode. And there came a major development partner, which I will not name, and they wanted me to actually go back to square one, as they lobby very hard to have me use their diagnostic tool to assess the quality or lack thereof of our public procurement systems. And so I remember there was for a couple of months, many back and forth. It really increasingly to me sounded like the dev talk. And at some point, when I received that partner, we had face to face. I said, but listen, you are bringing me back to square one. I'm way past that. We know what the issues are. And please, my needs right now are the following. I want to finalize the digitization of our procurement systems. That's what I need. So if you can help me on that, thank you. If you cannot, no, thanks, no. And at some point, I had to escalate this, through a formal letter, a nice but firm letter, telling him that these are my needs. I don't need this tool, because I really felt that this donor just wanted to tick a box back to headquarters, and that they were not listening. So I think this is very important. A donor may be tempted to influence your priorities, but I think as a public official, if you feel that it doesn't meet your need, it doesn't align with your agenda, say no. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Kaba. A powerful lesson, not just for the government side, always keep no on the table, but also for the funders and the entrepreneurs in this room with us today, which is to really think about what the impact that you're having on the government that you're trying to help with. The minister talks about public expenditure systems. Only a decade ago, some 6 donors in Africa who were working with countries on their public expenditure management systems had managed to craft 11 different reporting systems on their projects. This is crazy. Can you imagine if you personally were working in the finance ministry, whether of Guinea or Uganda, and you had to spend every single day filling in all of these different reporting documents instead of getting on with your job, which was to steward the finances of the country. So there's just a little thought to leave you with from Minister Kaba, to whom we'll return in a moment. Let me move to Ambassador Deb Malik. Ambassador Deb Malik was the US ambassador to Liberia and Uganda. That meant for you, Deb, really watching closely in a country which relies so heavily on external partners to fund social priorities. You were there at a time when donors all like to talk about ownership, but did it feel like that? So as you hosted, you're sitting there as ambassador, you're hosting these donors, they're all coming to Liberia and Uganda and saying, we want to respect the ownership of the country. What happened in practice?
Thanks for that question, and thanks for having the opportunity to participate today. I think, there are a lot of different things that we need to do, and this is something that doesn't apply just to government funding or to official development assistance, although we certainly, from the US perspective, need to make some changes in how we work with governments. But I think that two of the key pieces are, one, yes, we have to work from the beginning with the governments, the local governments, to determine what is it really that they're trying to address, what is it that they actually need. And to echo what Minister Kaba said, this issue of listening truly to where they actually are in the process and supporting them in the efforts that they've already mapped out that need to happen is absolutely critical. And the other piece is, if you're talking, as we are in this panel, about taking things to scale, is you have to plan for that scale from the beginning. I think too often often we come in, whether as donors, social entrepreneurs, as foundations, whatever, we have a great idea. We work with the governments, or we work with local communities to craft those ideas and get pilot projects going. And then at the end of the life cycle, or towards the end of the life cycle, we say, here, take this, scale it up. And, you know, we're out of cycle with budget cycles. We're out of cycle with national planning cycles, and governments don't necessarily have the resources or the ability to scale it up in any way. And then what is perhaps a good idea or a good solution disappears and doesn't really go anywhere. So I think those are the two key pieces: is we have to really listen to the local context, and we have to plan for scale from the beginning.
So Deb, just to clarify on that, you're not saying we shouldn't pilot policies, but you're saying—
No, I'm not saying you have to, because we don't know, you know, just because something works even somewhere else doesn't necessarily mean in a local environment, in a new environment, in a new culture, in a new economy, in a new society, that it will work the same way. Or often we don't know for sure whether the intervention will have the impact that we want. So yes, you have to pilot. But what you have to do from the beginning is ensure that it's not only the ministry or the agency of government that you're working with that has to be involved. It has to be a broader whole of government effort. Ministries of finance need to know what's happening so that they understand that if the health ministry comes to them and says, we're going to need more money to scale up a program to address, you know, to improve birth outcomes and keep mothers and babies alive, they need to start planning for that in the right budget cycle and understand the importance of having that additional funding, not just on a one-time basis, but something that will carry on as part of the base of the budget. If the finance ministry doesn't know about it and the health ministry doesn't go and make the right advocacy early enough on in the budget cycle, that money won't be there. And so even if governments or funders, foundations, and others are willing to provide funding, in an external way, it still has to be part of that process. And we too often just ignore the government's own, not only the government's own financial management systems, but their budget cycles as well.
Thank you so much, Deb. So the importance of seeing all of government, and we're hoping that today's panel will help many of you who are not part of governments to see what government looks like from the inside. But let me turn to Paulin Bazinga, originally from Rwanda. So, you know, you've got a close eye on a country that uses donors and funders pretty well when we think about keeping the government in the driving seat. But you are Director of Health for Africa at the Gates Foundation, and you know the foundation, while you've been in it, has learned lessons about this along the way. And I think we'd all love to hear what are the lessons learned along the way, and does what both Minister Kaba and Ambassador Malik say, does it resonate for you, Paulin? Sorry, you're on mute.
Apology for that. Just saying thank you very much for having me, and it's really a pleasure to share this panel with you all. I think Minister Kaba and Ambassador Deb really, you know, set up the scene for me, and I'll just continue from there. Everything that they said resonated extremely well with me and also with the Gate Foundation. And as you know, the Gate Foundation has been in existence for close to 21 years now. And the first 10 years of our existence, we did most of our global bet in terms of really, you know, managing from Seattle and working with many, you know, global organizations, you know, in Washington, DC or Geneva, to make sure that if we can partner to create some global public good, you know, the private sector and government will take it up and scale it, right? Those are some of the big mistakes that we made at the beginning. And then in 2008, 9, and 10, we quickly realized that it was so instrumental to shift and start working both at the global level, but also engaging at both at regional and country level. This is why in 2012, we had some major, you know, strategy restructuring called the global redesign, and the foundation decided to open offices in India, in China, in South Africa, in Nigeria, later on in Germany, in the UK. And since then, we've really shifted our approach to start working very closely with the government. My past role was actually the director of the Nigeria country office for the Gates Foundation, where I spent 3 years there. And the objective was really to get to understand the government better, to work along with the government so that, as Minister Kaba was saying, we can really align with the government priorities. And the priority that we have as the Gates Foundation are all government priorities. There is nothing that we do that do not align, because it's all about making sure that people live a healthy and productive life. And that goes through strengthening the primary health care, making sure that kids have vaccines and the medication that they need. And we've learned those lessons, and it has really helped shape. I think when you listen properly to the government, I remember, we had our first grant in Ethiopia, for example, back in 2000, right? And we had many multiple grants that were operating, supporting the government. But in 2010 or 12, the government of Ethiopia called us and said, no, this is not working. We think that the Gates Foundation can do better. If you can bring all your grants under one plan so that you can align with the government of Ethiopia plan. And we changed that. We moved staff from Seattle to be based in Ethiopia, and we created one Ethiopia integrated health plan, aligned with the government, health transformation plan, and then change our grant. And we were co-designing grant with the government of Ethiopia. And since then, we've started the process of signing MOUs with the government. And Ambassador Deb said it so nicely. By the way, yesterday I was on a call with the government of Guinea, for example. So we are in partnership with the government of Guinea to strengthen routine immunization in the Kankan region, one of the largest region there. And we've started the process for the year. If it was the old way of doing business, we will just go to Kanka, get an NGO, start working and then implementing a program. And we know that it will fail at the end. So what we did for a year, we worked with the government and say, can we do a complete diagnosis about what are the problems, what is needed, etc. And that process led to an MOU that we signed before we start the work. The Minister of Finance was represented, the Minister of local administration was there, the Minister of Health were there. And then we signed in and we said, this is the 3-year program, this is how much the program costs, this is what we'll be able to put in the basket. And we wanted really the government to put the money for 2021. But the Minister of Finance said, our budget is done, it's sealed. We can't put in money this year, but we can commit to 2022. If you can put money this year, next year we put in money. We have those MOUs in Burkina Faso where we've worked with the government. We have the MOU in 2 provinces in DRC. So we've completely changed our approach, because it's only when you work closely with the government that the program will be scaled and sustained, because they are actually accountable for scale. And we are there not to drive impact for us, but really to make sure that the government is in the driver's seat. But as Minister Kaba said, when a government want donors to align, they do align, but you need to really ask them. I learned probably the hard way, from Rwanda. I was working in the public sector as well, and I strongly believe in that, and this is how we operate, as a foundation as well.
So Paula, that must be hard, because let's be honest in this room. Most funders, most entrepreneurs, most donors, they want to feel that they're loved not just for their money, but for their ideas and for the priorities that they're bringing to the table. And you're saying, no, we respect the government's priorities, and which sort of means really you're just bringing resources to the table. What's been difficult in that? What's the hardest bit of that?
No, I don't. I think when you look at all priorities, they're the same priority, because at the end of the day, both donors and government want really to make sure that you have sustained programs that are effective, that are efficient, and that are reaching the poorest of the poor. The challenge is how to get there and at which speed to get there. So the donor sometimes, it depends. In the private philanthropy, we may we may have some flexibility compared to some bilateral deal, because the bilateral, they have a budget, it's limited, it's earmarked for some etc. So even for us, you know, it's, I will not say it's earmarked, but like we have some priority in terms of health, agriculture, financial inclusion. The government may say our top priority is really creating job for young people, right? We will say definitely this is something the government needs to do, but we don't have we don't have a strategy for that. I think it's a very you know, open conversation that you need to have, and then find that alignment. When you get that alignment, then you can really decide now, how do we move forward? I think the big challenge is the how. And then also for the donor to really understand, you know, when you've worked within government, then you understand the challenge that they go through. You know, it's not as, you know, straightforward and easy as us. Like we can move things very quickly, but through the government, a minister of health needs to, you know, sometimes it's not the minister, it's really the people below, the cadre, like the director of planning, the director of budget. Those directors, you need really to understand how they're working. If you really understand how they're working and you align your priority, and then, you know, up the chain from the donors, we also need to tell our leadership. So we have amazing leaders who understand us, who give us the space to say, we can tell them, no, this will not work. Like you can go and tell our president or tell our co-chairs, but we tell them the truth. This is the reality from the field. This is why how the Gate Foundation as well is really building on board people who have country level experience to really provide that, you know, context insight, you know, to align with the government.
So, Paula, just the last one. A few years ago, the Minister of Health from Mozambique said at a meeting I was hosting, when I became Minister of Health, I thought I was going to set health priorities and implement them for my people. I didn't realize that my entire role was to be a middleman to foreign donors and philanthropists and foundations. You were on the phone to the minister from Guinea this morning, I think you said, or yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah.
Okay, is that what it is like for that minister, do you think? Are they mostly sitting, meeting with, taking phone calls from, and interacting with outside donors and foundations and international organizations and entrepreneurs? Do you think it's probably still like that for them?
Oh, definitely not in Guinea. And, the minister is setting the priority, and we've had a year to plan with him and with his team. I think, you know, I think Minister Kaba will be able to speak about that better. I think it's all about when, as a minister, you set the priority, donor will align. And when you tell donors, you know, here's our priority, please, even you can walk along with the donor to say, you know, I have 5 years here, like we have a national priority, you know, national strategy for health that we need to develop. Please come along and help me develop this so that we can make sure that your priorities and the government priority are aligned, and then put in the government plan. And then the donor can now, you know, start, you know, from the national plan, you know, to walk through that. I think it all depends on the government. When the government sets those, you know, there are many places where, you know, the government has a plan. When you go to Ethiopia, you go to Rwanda, you go, you know, to many other countries, as Minister Kaba said, in Guinea as well, they have the plan. In Burkina Faso, they have their national development plan, and you have to align to the plan. Yeah.
Thank you. And that, I have to say, is why, you know, I'm sitting here with the building behind me is the Blavatnik School of Government here at Oxford University. And that's why I'm here, trying to do research and education that helps governments know what their priorities should do. Let me move now to Jamie Cooper, who is the founder, the life force behind Big Win Philanthropy. And Jamie, you really have been working with governments, I'm sure, with successes and with challenges. Tell us about where you think it works. Where does it work best?
Thank you, Naira, and thank you to everyone. Yeah, I'll pick up a bit where the others left. Is, you know, it's been a process for me. I won't say I was even as enlightened as Gates when I started as a philanthropist to have an end goal that governments would pick up the programs that we thought were so impactful and working. You know, that has been an evolution to the point where I believe that you can't achieve development by working around government, but it has been, you know, first a serendipitous process of finding that I was most aligned with the government on something very high risk and high impact that we wanted to move forward with. And then coming to appreciate that governments are the way to get to scale and sustainability. And then to a next stage of realizing that in fact, because they are elected for the most part, or they're at the will of the people at some level, almost no matter what, that they feel enormous pressure to deliver and deliver reasonably fast and tangibly, and that set up a form of alignment. But I think the big piece that I've come to appreciate that has made us more successful is what a difficult job it is to be a government leader, and that the difficulty is not in the technical, but it's in the political, and that happens on so many levels, that you serve at the will of your president. So the moment, if you're a minister or an appointed official of any other ilk, you know, you stay if you are helping the government's agenda, and if you're not, you could be gone tomorrow. That you have to explain to your population why they may or may not come first in the rollout of services when there are limited resources. That you have to be able to bring, and I don't agree that donors tend to fall in line when you have a plan. They will fight it and fight it for what they want to do to the end. And you are often put in a take it or leave it situation, and making that decision to say no is very, very hard. And again, is your president going to back you on that? It is a really challenging role to be in that seat. And I think one of the key things is how well do we appreciate that and get behind those people and support their need to navigate all those pieces.
And Jamie, what was the moment for you when that kind of, you know, you intimated in the first part of that answer that, you know, you've learned the hard way. Is there any particular kind of moment or negotiation as a funder that you were in that made you start thinking about this differently?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, initially, so my first sort of great success working with government was working toward getting in Tamil Nadu to provide treatment, antiretroviral treatment for HIV/AIDS when the government has still not okayed public spending for treatment, and the process and being directed on things very specific that, you know, we needed to do an evaluation that was both economic and health. It needed to be done by a partnership of an Indian evaluating entity of this ilk with an Ivy League US, you know, and sort of being a bit baffled by these rules, but following them and it being successful. But my real aha, probably where I understood and really changed my way of working, was in Ethiopia. It was with Tedros, and he asked for help to change the numbers. They were making enormous progress on all child health outcomes except infant mortality, and that was where he wanted help. And I, you know, made forays that, you know, we should try to do nutrition because that would tick many boxes, and he pushed back very hard. I was very concerned that as we got to the decision being about what we would implement, that it would be a child birth checklist, that at that point only 16% of women gave birth in hospitals. So I wanted to do a home birth checklist, and he said that's not where the government wants to go. And you know, he assigned us to work in 100 caballes that were all over the place and not efficient for us. But in the end, you know, we did push and pull a bit. His deputy, who was our point person, now my CEO, Cassette, told me to back off and explained to me that, you know, he has to be able to, for donors, because of the importance of the MDGs, show that we can get this infant mortality rate down. And doing it nutrition, you know, while it might be the smarter way to do it, was too inefficient. It wouldn't turn the numbers fast enough. So if the big donors were going to stay with him, this is where we were going to focus. And lo and behold, you know, after we were successful there, we worked on nutrition, and we did do maternity and waiting homes that provide nutrition. He was absolutely right. You know, within 18 months, their priority was to get women to give birth in hospitals. Over 60% of women were giving birth in hospitals. That was the right checklist to use. We would have undermined their progress. We did do a home after birth checklist, which also, you know, I think we added to that conversation and improved the impacts. But, you know, that was the moment where I really realized, like, this person understands their context, their politics, and the more and more I sit on the government side of the table, the more I realize how important it is to be with them, to be a trusted partner, not to undermine them myself in any way.
Thank you, Jamie. A really powerful thought that, of course, what we can't see from the outside are the political imperatives that governments are having to work to, where the sequencing of reform really matters. If you've just been elected into government, having some quick wins, showing that you can make a difference is so important to starting to consolidate public support that will keep you in power and enable you to do the longer run things. And I think these are things that it's quite hard to see as we're focused on specific issues. Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn to our final panelist. As I do, I'd just like to say that I welcome your questions, comments to specific panelists, and the magicians behind the scenes will open up the chat. So please do feel free to contribute questions. If you've got really short, sharp questions, I'm probably more likely to be able to pick them up and put them to our panels. So please do feel free to go ahead. But before then, it's really a delight to welcome Patrick Mugisha, or Mugi, Commissioner for Innovation in the Ugandan Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. You're working across sectors to deliver Uganda's National Development Plan. And you're brokering all of these relations that we've all been talking about all and every day. So it'd be lovely to hear from you, Mugi. What is it that you do to try to get funders, governments, and innovators aligned?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, and thank you, my colleagues, and as well the participants at this forum. I must admit that Uganda as a country, we have the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation as the youngest ministry, created in 2016. And so it has really come at a time when we're just at the center of the quest to try and attain the SDGs, upon which largely attaining them is based on how strong countries are going to build their systems on S&I. But again, from the National Development Plan perspective, currently we're implementing the National Development Plan 3. And we shifted from the sector approach to the program working approach. And the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation is taking lead of the program on innovation, technology development and transfer. And that means the mandate is upon us to really try and ensure that at all levels of government, issues to do with innovation, creativity, as well as scaling up of existing solutions and technology transfer is well articulated. But the question is that all majority of the activities happening largely within the innovation ecosystem in Uganda, and also as well as research, largely it's being funded by the donor community. And you find at some point, you have to try to kind of balance the boat, as I might say, to ensure that the priorities of the funder vis-a-vis the end user and the government as the middle person are well brought to light. But that's not the case at times. So the challenges we've been facing definitely would be issues where I come as the funder, I've got a higher stake, and I will determine the overall agenda. So at the end of the day, it becomes quite a huge challenge for majority of governments, not only Uganda, and especially within the African community, to realize this. And it all goes back to the fact that majority of them, again, at the point of initiation, they never have, they're not, it seems we are not good negotiators. The funders will always have an upper hand in the negotiation process. So at the end of the day, you will never get things right at onset. But that is changing. And I'm an advocate for that change that I want to see in Uganda going forward. I realize funders need to have a forum. They need to communicate between themselves. There has to be a forum between the funders and the policy makers, which is a dialogue that both should need to come at the same table and plan together. My brother, Dr. Basinga, mentioned something that funders are going to come and they cannot influence the national process. But my brother, you're forgetting that that particular national development plan could be funded by a donor. So then definitely, I mean, you have no way out. It's either he'll tell you, I funded this plan, so go by the rules of the game. And I think you're caught up in a scenario like you really don't want, you don't know what to do. And I think then another bit looking at aspects of how do we make sure that we are able to align the funders together. It's all about now at the point of once we understand what the funder wants, then what government really wants in place. Going forward, we want to have a human-centered design approach for every aspect that we really want to undertake in the journey ahead, because everyone has to empathize with each other. We realize another challenge is that you find that we've got primary funders, secondary funders, and tertiary funders. And towards the end of the pipeline, you find the person who's trying to push you is the tertiary funder because he or she is getting some feedback from the secondary funder who gets feedback from the primary funder. So it's like a chain of people involved. So you find at the end of the day, the tertiary funder wants to impress the secondary funder, who in return has to impress the primary funder. So you put under pressure, and if things are not done their way, someone is also likely putting his job or maybe the funding at stake. So I think really it's such a very difficult mix of events. But I think going forward, really for the good of the community, the country, and the global kind of like a unity, we just need to really come back and decide that whatever we really want to do, we really do it from the point of ability where every stakeholder matters, whatever they bring on board at the point of ideation. It all goes back to the designing process. And that's what I really want to encourage for most governments and funders to really take keen on. Let's co-design the process and let us move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mugi. You take me right back to Dar es Salaam about 15 years ago when ownership became development funders' mantra. Sitting in a small room where there wasn't a single Tanzanian in the room, but there was a huge argument about which of the external agencies should lead the Tanzanian ownership of all other donors' programs. So just the kind of paradox that you set out. But let's shift this round a bit, and I'm thrilled to see questions coming in, and I'm going to come right to those. But I do want to just come back, Minister Kaba. You know, when you were a minister, we've been speaking as though the government of each country has one set of priorities and one clear plan. And we all know very well that that is never the case. You know, there's a huge constant struggle across ministries in any country about what gets done. And surely when you're minister, it's very convenient sometimes to be able to have funders who agree with you, but not with your cabinet colleagues, and to be able to say, hey, you know, we're going to do this because I've got these funders behind it. Isn't it a little bit of a trump card when you're in the cabinet?
It may be, but again, okay, I may be an exception as a you know, as a minister who was able to say no. So just answering to also to Jamie, I think it is difficult, it is true, but it is necessary to be able to say no, because it will also, I think, pave the way for genuine and unbiased partnerships with the donor community. But coming back to your question, Nair, you know, I sometimes used funders, not priorities, but leverage for my own, for my reforms. And I remember one example was that, you know, when I came into office, we had just concluded rounds of reviews and programs supported by international financial institutions. And then at some point we just wanted to breathe, as my president put it. We wanted to be able to borrow money for major infrastructure programs. And so we were without any support from the IMF and the likes. And I could see the nervousness, you know, within the international community, because I thought that we would just go wild and you know, and spend money, not having any regards with our budgets, rules, etc. But we did not do so, actually. When we decided to start negotiations, I remember that we were still having very animated discussion internally within government and also with the president on whether this was necessary or not. And I used some of the donors' programs that they had planned for us, because I knew that I would have difficulty implementing some reforms when it came to my colleagues in government. So you can use that in a subtle way, but also in a way that can help you bring about, you know, sensitive yet fundamental reforms. So I used it in many ways, but again, maybe I would say I was lucky to know the donor community very well, so I knew what, you know, how to not manipulate, but how to leverage on the many aspects or the many support they could come with, and just to get also my way through and most importantly do my work, because I had a difficult task to carry out, and I needed to achieve my objectives. So I think sometimes it may be interesting to use some of the things donor may be willing to support to help you in your own agenda and to help you carry out your own reforms.
Great, thank you, Minister. So a bit of a trump card sometimes. And I'd like to bring in a question from Anna Pantelik, who says, for the past few years, the government of Uganda has pushed back on donor-driven priorities to the detriment of the social sector. She addresses this question to Ambassador Malik, but I'd like to get Mugi to answer it as well. How do we balance the desire to advocate for social investments and other questions, or, you know, on gender, on all kinds of, you know, the priorities that many people on this call want to bring to other countries? How do we balance that with this respect for sovereignty and government priorities? Ambassador.
Well, I think it's this, of course, is the fundamental challenge, because it gets right to the heart of whether or not we as donors or funders, whether it's a bilateral, small sector, however the funding comes in, with our great ideas about what needs to be done and this need to align with the government. You know, what that has created in the Ugandan context is that you have these sort of, you know, an exaggeration or an exacerbation of these parallel systems, because donors and foundations are largely funding social sector programs because they are not highlighted at the moment as a priority for the government of Uganda, related to where they want to put their scarce resources. I think that, you know, that's going to always be a tension that exists if you need the government, if the program or what that you're trying to support requires government participation in order to scale up or to operate. And I don't think we have a good answer for how you eliminate that, except to go back to these basics, which is to ensure from the outset that there's a conversation and a partnership from the beginning, co-planning, as Mugi said, starting to design things in a way that then eventually, when the government's plan calls for greater investment, moving funding from infrastructure, which is where the government of Uganda's priority is at the moment, to more social sector spending, how you can make that transition better. But you know, none of us have the solution, the magic bullet for solving this problem forever, but we have to a certain extent, leave our egos at the door if we're going to truly let governments lead on setting their development priorities. And it's not easy for any of us, whether we're a government or we're a foundation, because we all think we've got the plan and the solution.
And of course, it's worth pointing out that also within our own countries, within the United States, within the United Kingdom, within other donor countries, those social priorities that we're saying should be at the top of the agenda in other countries are not actually that prominently at the top of our own government's agendas. So there is a little bit of a tension in this.
Well, it's true. And if I could just make one last point before you go to Mugi, I think it is true. And so we have to look at realistically, what's the other way to address the problem and understand that we don't always have that solution.
Thank you, Deb. Mugi.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I can't really divert so much from what Ambassador Debbie has just said. But then also one of the strategies that as the Ministry of Science, Tech and Innovation, we are seeking to bring in place to try and mitigate those kind of like scenarios. Number one, we believe we don't want to send away any potential partner or funder. I mean, it's Africa never to send away any visitor. We're welcoming. You need to welcome every visitor. But the question is, we want to make sure that every funder who comes in as a visitor or a potential partner has a home to identify with. And through one of the initiatives that you are putting through is the development of a national innovation cluster program, which is actually going to be able to help us decentralize all forms of innovation and creativity related activities across board in all sectors. Eventually, that will be comprised of a specific sector-specific innovation cluster initiatives, for example, health innovation cluster, energy innovation cluster, agro or edutech. And because we realize, for example, there are very many challenges that every sector really inherently has. But because of the scarce resources, government might never really take so much keen interest in every sector's needs. So that means if we put them in a cluster mode, it's easy for health to say that our priority area is in mental health. And so partners, for example, Grand Challenges Canada, who find that maybe mental health is one of their priorities, then they're going to find a home to actually make an intervention without any kind of a restriction because everything has been laid out. But when you come at the macro level, it becomes difficult. I think it all goes back to really different aspects. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we've got a nice kind of tension that I'm going to get these panelists to resolve before we close, with Minister Kaba saying you've got to say no, and Mugi saying you've got to find a place for everyone. These sound like different approaches. It's slightly in tension. I'd like to though pick up a question from Gannon, and put it to Jamie and Paulin. Gannon points out that with a resurgence of decentralization, a lot of funders are now in conversations with mayors or local governments or city level governments, where the power imbalance is even more marked. You know, it's one thing to say we're the national government, we've got our priorities. What does it look like? Is it more, let me come to Paulin, is it more difficult when you're an organization the size of the Gates Foundation and you're working with the mayor of a city? Is it more difficult to try to keep some kind of equality in that negotiation?
Thank you very much. This is a really good question, and we are seeing this more and more, especially in countries that has federal level, because as you engage at the national level or at the federal level, the level of impact is just not ensured if you don't engage at the subnational level where the actual implementation is happening, where the leaders that are driving implementation are. I think it's quite challenging for many donors, including us, but and it's different from country to country. I think the first thing to do is really to understand the context, how the country is organized, how the national agenda is being set. In some countries, you have a quite centralized national government where the ministry set the agenda and then they work with, the region or the states, etc., to implement programs. And then it's really very important to not engage directly only, but to engage, it's an and both, right? You engage with both structures at the same time and put them in. In some other places, like country like Nigeria, you align at the federal level, but you have to have separate MOUs with different states because those states are autonomous. They have their own budget, etc. You engage. I think it's just that the donor need to not have one size fit all. It's really context based. So the example I was giving for the government of Guinea yesterday, for example, we engaged with the ministries, but at the same time we had the team from Kanka. They were on the call, but they cannot sign on behalf of the government. The government sign, and then they align with what the government will do, but they will do the implementation. It's complex. As donors, we just need to adapt, understand the context. But later on, I would like to touch on something that my brother, Mugi, let's just call him Mugisha, because I think as we're cutting his name, is losing a lot of importance. It means blessing, sharing the same name as my son. So my brother Mugisha says something quite important, which is there are many funders. There are primary, secondary, tertiary funders, right? As donors, we need to be really very clear to cut those intermediaries. The more we can engage with one funder who's based in country, who understand the context, the easier it will be. So the Gates Foundation, it's quite hard for us, but we're doing our best to really focus most of our grant making to grantees that are based in country who understand, etc., as we're also helping to build their capacity to respond to government support. This is why when you have a good grantee who's based in a province or in a state there, they can give you much better intelligence and know how to engage than an intermediary who's based in London, in the US, and then subcontracting someone in Nairobi to reach someone who's in a rural place in Ethiopia or Uganda. It's challenging, but we just need to adapt and learn.
Thank you, Paulin. Jamie, you're working with cities and with mayors. So what does that look like? Is it too easy to get them to agree, or like how do you make sure it's their priorities? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, devolution is happening, and the demographics, at least in Africa where we are, would suggest it's very important to be working in cities. The majority of people will live in them between 2030 and 2050. That will change, so the migration is there. I think it's really a case-by-case basis about, especially if you're coming in as the social entrepreneur or a funder, is really knowing where you're aligned and who has the authority and how you can, can constructively get to some place that you're both really determined to drive, and that will get impact. And, again, I think even more so at the city level, you have to appreciate the complexity of relationships, whether it's unions, people, often you still are working, often, your president may be a different party, and the politics are tough. And I think being there to support needs that might not be what you usually think about supporting, to make sure that someone who really wants to drive an impact that you care about has those resources is what, is the right approach, or the smarter approach.
Thank you, Jamie. Look, George Straw asks, just while I've got you, Jamie, can social entrepreneurs play a role in being a bit of a go-between between the donors and government? Does that strike you, or are they more likely to get in the way?
No, I don't think they're likely to get in the way. I think, a lot of these themes and messages are not just funder messages, but they're also social entrepreneur takeaways. This is an iterative process. Not everybody's going to want to work on what drives you. So being, convinced you want to work in the long way, or, wherever it is, may not make sense. It really is about, there are, and especially for those who want to work on social issues, it may not be at the federal level that you can reach the greatest number of people and make the most difference. So being open to both how the intervention and your strengths get nuanced to meet the context, and to who you're going to work with and where, I think it is what ultimately gets you to the right place. But what you don't want to do is ever put it, to sort of backdoor to your question, Naira, is you don't want to sort of set it up as a take it or leave it. My funders are going to fund this, do you want it? I mean, if you're going to put some resources that are going to reach their people in their community, and you're going to get the funder to pay for it, I probably don't have a whole lot to lose by letting you do that. But that isn't really the way to get to a constructive place. I think if you can negotiate back with your funders why ultimately, not being so rigid, gets us to the ultimate impact we really care about. Keeping our egos low keeps us to the ultimate impact we really care about, will get us to the scale, will give us an exit. That's when social entrepreneurs can really be an essential interlocutor.
Thank you, Jamie. We've got a question here. I'm going to go first to Minister Kaba with this one. Blair Glencourse asks, I'd love to hear more about the gender dynamics of all of this. What pressures or challenges do female decision makers on both sides, government and donor, face that might be different to those men face? And how can we better account for those when we talk about improving governance? This is interesting because it's Minister Kaba that says, no, you've got to say no, and you've got to be firm. And it's Commissioner Mugisha who said we should welcome everybody. So is there any gender dimension to the way we govern these or not? Minister Kaba.
That's a very interesting question. And I think that obviously as a woman who was appointed first female in a very male dominated environment, I often find myself, asking myself the same question about the challenges I was facing. Were they because I was that leader that really wanted to turn around things, that pushed for difficult reforms, that fought corruption, that wanted to, significantly improve governance? Or was it because I was a woman, relatively young? I wasn't that young, but I had, of course, to supervise male that, I mean, some of them were even uncles, I mean, outside work, you know, so I could see that sometimes it was difficult for them to, I could see them swallowing their, I don't know, seniority and male manhood, so to say. Yeah, it was difficult, but I think, and I remember, I recall also, you know, I was dealing at the time with a chief of, the woman who was leading, actually the chief who was leading the IMF mission was also a woman. And so I could see, you know, some of the dynamics playing against me, also being played against her with her teams. She had senior men in her teams when they would come to visit us and do the work. And I could see that she was also trying to assert authority, which also I had to maybe, I mean, from the beginning, maybe from a period of 3 to 6 months, at the beginning, I really struggled. I had to be very assertive. I had to, to just establish my authority, which I succeeded in doing. But sometimes I think this also adds up to the difficulty that you have to navigate through. And just the point of, I mean, I'm welcoming everyone, but provided that these people listen to me, and especially when they have in front of them somebody like me that knows where she wants to go, what the goals are. Someone that, and I think it's Jamie who very nicely put it, for me, the managing macroeconomic policies, fiscal policies, there was nothing new under the sun for me. But what I found extremely difficult was to navigate the political economy of carrying out the reforms I had to carry out, of trying to identify who could I trust in the system, who could be the change agents I could rely on. That was extremely hard, and I don't think I succeeded in doing this because I was kicked out. But I think I was too much of a troublemaker, trying to curb corruption, trying to digitalize my ministry. But that's okay, you know. Experience, I mean, failure is learning. So I've learned my lesson. But yeah, I think the point that Jimmy raised, I think is very important. And I think that sometimes some donors don't get it. You have foundations that really understand that. They don't come up with big money, but they come with this ability to support you as a leader. And I think that's very important. And I would like to make also to commend, you know, this initiative of President Sirleaf with the Amuje initiative, you know, that Presidential Center for Women and Development tries to do. They really try to empower more African women across the continent and support them and embolden them in order to take more leadership position in the public sector. Because I believe that, you know, I know that donors also have a lot to say on governments, and I know what it is: inefficiencies, bureaucracy, corruption, slowness of our processes, and they're absolutely right. But I think that in order for them to get also the right response from government, it is important that we have institutions or initiatives like the Amuje initiative that help bring a new generation of leaders that would also be willing to do the right thing and work for the many, because ultimately that's what we want to do. We want to be inclusive. We want that our populations improve their living conditions. And that cannot be the case if in government we have people that only work for the happy few close to power. So
thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner Mugisha, I think the minister is saying, we will welcome everybody, but take your shoes off at the door, please. Is that, are you in agreement with this?
No, I can't disagree with my sister, but the truth is that what would happen most of the time would be, I mean, it's the approach that you're going to take to make that work. And when I say that you don't lock anyone behind, it can only happen when I've already set up internal mechanisms to direct everyone that comes to the intended arena where he or she needs to go. So I think it all goes back setting up systems in place to accommodate everyone that comes on board. But of course, at the bedrock of this is that alignment to what government really wants. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think.
Thank you so much. I'd like now to move to a question from Nicola, because Nicole's question is important. She says, listening to all of your government profiles, I felt overwhelmed. In Lebanon, unfortunately, we don't have the government's support. Our social work comes right in place due to the absence of the government's roles and tasks. So many parts of the world, and increasingly, actually don't have governments, or don't have functioning governments, or don't have governments that have either consent or control. So I guess I'd like to come to Ambassador Malik and to Paulin Bazinga and to ask, so what do you think the social entrepreneurs, the philanthropists, the funders should be doing in those spaces, right? Where there isn't a government to partner with. Ambassador Malik, you've seen this in Liberia.
Well, I think well, I would say in Liberia, we did have a government to partner with. President Sirleaf was obviously trying to create those partnerships to be able to, for the improvement of the country in wherever it came from, whether it was working through government systems and helping strengthen those systems, or allowing social sector, private sector actors, NGOs and others to also address those same priorities. But I think that this is a good question, and it comes back to something that Paulin said earlier, which context matters, right? So you have to look at which country you want to work in and what's the situation. Government control, span of control, government effectiveness, institutional capacity is going to vary wildly from country to country. And so there is very much a role for those who do not have to work with government, for those who can go into those situations and identify where they can create partnerships at the local level, at the community level, maybe even with the government, if there are some areas within that government that are effective. Because those are actually the kinds of situations where innovative solutions, new approaches, organizations that can be nimble and reactive to changing conditions are absolutely critical. And so those kinds of spaces are much more difficult for government, for bilateral donors and others to sometimes go in and work in, because we aren't as flexible and aren't as nimble. But it comes back to, even in those situations, you have to, I think the rules still apply. You have to identify a partner that can give you that local context. You have to work from the beginning to identify and agree on what is the problem that you are collectively trying to solve. And just because you have the greatest new idea, or something that works somewhere else, it may not be the solution for that context at the moment. And then planning from there of what's the future for that program. Is it a pilot that you hope to scale up, and scale can't happen without government institutions? Then maybe you need to refocus your objective. Is it, and then collaborate and, information share and work diligently to try to make it come to fruition. So I think there's space for, there's certainly a space for all the actors, as we've been talking. But at the end of the day, and it's one thing I think we haven't talked about enough, not only is it important to keep governments in the lead in the instances where you want government scale up, but the other piece is, whether you have a government that you're trying to work with or whether you're working at local level, there has to be better collaboration and coordination so that you're not duplicating efforts and you're not creating that duality of systems and challenges for the ministers and the governments who are trying to coordinate all these pieces, because we are often part of the problem, not the solution, despite our best efforts.
Thank you, Ambassador Malik. And now to Dr. Bazinga. And if I can add to that question, so there's the question about what you can do in fragile contexts or where there's no government. But I do want to pull out Andrew Levy's question. Thank you, Andrew, who asks, what about the role of a racial dynamic? i.e. having or seeing a friendly face or perceived cultural competence in donor-government power relations, which you must see both sides of in the Gates Foundation. Dr. Bazinga, just if you've got a view on that. But perhaps first on the fragile settings.
Thank you very much. I think Ambassador Deb really nailed that question. I'll just add the, fact that, I don't think there is any country where there is no government, with some very, very rare exception, but there are maybe, fragility where probably the government is in a place where they are not able to play fully the role of the government, which is really to take accountability of the people and to take care of the people, right? Now, as development partners, this is where, for social entrepreneur, etc., this is where we'll bring what I'll probably call our development integrity, right? It's not to use that gap, to create something parallel that will not, when the government will be ready to take on fully, they will have challenges to take it on. I think it's just important. This is where the some of our key partners and play a critical role, like the UN agencies, like we've seen in those places, because we don't implement program directly. In those kind of places, we work very closely with the, kind of UNICEF and WHO and others, because in most, time they are there present, and they can really, help to, navigate, the time of fragility. And as Ambassador Deb said, just keeping in mind the need to make sure that, when the government is ready, you are able to transition the program or to empower them really to continue, moving that forward. On the second question that you asked about, racial the debate is on now with what is happening in the world now in terms of diversity, equality and inclusion, and we're seeing that more and more, in many organizations. I think in the past few years you've seen, some organizations. I was, looking at some, statistics. When you look at, if I look at my note here, I recall back in probably 2007, etc. Some, organizations were moving their headquarters from the UK, etc., to be based in Africa, and they've started those changes, and that to make sure that they're sending a clear message that our headquarters will be based in Africa, and our leadership will be, occupied by people who, understand the context, etc., who can really, drive those changes. And you can see that, Jamie Cooper as a biggest philanthropy, her CEO is someone, Minister Kasete, who drive those agendas. So the kind of advice or strategy he will put there are strategies that resonate with many African countries, etc. So I think that change is happening. Even within the Gates Foundation, the All Africa operation is led by Umar Saidi, who's an African based in South Africa, and the leadership listened to him. Like, he set the direction of the Gates Foundation on the continent, and he's hiring, he's put in place a team of people who understand the context. But that does not mean that we don't need diversity, because diversity is so important. We continue to need our partners who are based in Seattle, in Geneva, in the UK, etc., because the challenge of this world will only be met if we bring diversity of thought and we understand who's playing which role. And at the Gates Foundation, we are now applying the principle of operating as one global foundation, so that when I was in Nigeria, I go to meet the Minister of Health, who's going to sit in the board of Gavi. I'm able to connect with my colleague who sits in the board of Gavi to understand at the global level, what can I provide to the minister from the country perspective, etc. So I think, like, not only shifting south, but elevating the south so that they have an eco voice, because what they're bringing is so instrumental. But at the same time, I think COVID-19 has showed us this. An organization that has been only relying on people who will fly from outside to come, now they're stuck. The work cannot go. But if you had people on the ground who can dare engage every day, and then through Zoom, you can just connect and keep the business going. So I think it's a big lesson for all of us, and a awakening moment for all of us. Yeah.
And the one little footnote I would add to that is, if you are an international organization, if you are a funder or a foundation, and you're setting up a country office, please don't go and poach all the best people from the Ministry of Finance, because they're needed in the Ministry of Finance. Particularly don't poach them if what you're doing is a capacity building project. You know, this sort of keeps taking us backwards. I'd like to now just come to some concluding comments. And one of them is, you know, as a funder going into a country, and so this is to Jamie and to Deb and to Paulin. Louis Borstin asks, you know, what is it that you look for in the government implementing partner? You know, you've talked about the need to look for a local partner, but are there 2 or 3 things that are kind of part of your mental checklist as you go in and you think, shall we work with this organization, or shall we work with this individual or not? What are the first 3 sort of tick boxes in your head as you make that decision? Any of you? Jamie? Is there a tick box in your head?
Yeah, I'm very lucky that through Amage and through the ministerial leadership program we run with Harvard and the mayoral program that will launch soon, that we get access to see a lot of people in action and choose partners largely through that. You know, what we're looking for is people who really have ambitious, transformative agendas and can articulate those in a quite tangible way. So not, I want to improve the education system, but, you know, we have a problem with, you know, the continuum from what happens when they graduate from school or technical training and the job market. It isn't working. I want everybody to have a quality job at the end of, you know, whenever they leave school, or, you know, with reading and arithmetic, something very clear in terms of legacy. That, and then I'm just looking for people who are really driven and are going to own that. And, you know, as Milano said, it's really hard. And I guess the third, you know, that they have to be able to change their style as she has, and, you know, a big toolbox, someone who's really, you know, I have confidence will make her best shot at being able to navigate this, because she really, really cares. And then we have to connect personally. I know that seems really simple, but I need to feel like this is the kind of person that I can hear what they're saying. I get them. They need to be able to trust me, that they can call me in the middle of the night and say, my union's blowing, I need help, and let me know. So, you know, we're on the same team. And
Thank
so
you.
right from the beginning.
Terrific.
Sorry,
So ambition, no, that was terrific. Ambition, drive, the ability to change style, a personal connection. Deborah, is there anything you would add to that, your checklist for whether this part of an implementing government is going to be the right partner?
Well, I think it really comes down to what Jamie said. I think it's passion, it's integrity, and it's flexibility, right? Because changing conditions, you can train people to have capacity they may be lacking, but if they don't care fundamentally and care about solving the problem, it's no good. If they can't be flexible to adjust to changing conditions, whether it's within the government systems they work, within the institutions, they're not going to be effective. And integrity at the end of the day is really sort of, if they can't do what's right when no one is looking, then it's going to create problems for everyone. So I think those are, you know, some of the same things that we all look for.
I love this word, integrity. We sometimes forget that integrity has 2 meanings. One is not corrupt, but the other is whole. And this discussion has been quite a lot about the integrity of a government official who is serving their own people, which means both the wholeness of that as well as their lack of corruption. And of course, to respect somebody's integrity means to actually to understand what that whole is and to work with it. And I think that does kind of capture something that's been in our conversation. Thank you, Deb. Paulin, would you add anything to the checklist of what you're looking for in the top couple of things you're looking for when you're deciding, yep, we'll work with these people on the ground?
I think I agree with the checklist, but the challenge that we have is that sometimes we don't have a choice, right? Because sometimes, you'll see among the donor community when a very smart minister or a permanent secretary is appointed, everyone wants to work with that person, right? And then without understanding the political economy about what you want to achieve, like, my approach has always been to really try to understand, like, where do we want to get? Who are the organization and the people we need to work with? And then how do we make it happen through that? They may not be the right people. I think there are some, like if, they may not have the highest integrity, but if they have the strategic drive, etc., and they're well positioned, you can really help them. This is why we've learned our lesson, and we even launched the program called the International Public Health Leadership Program, where we try to really look, because across all government offices, you will find junior, younger people who actually do the job. Most of the time, it's not the top person. It's like the second or third people there within the ministries. So we're trying to really, working with the University of Washington to create that pipeline of, mid leaders within the ministry. So because those one, when they grow, they can really make the change, etc. So it's not so easy.
Thank you. A wonderful point there. And Minister Kaba was nodding her head vigorously as you began, because one can only imagine when she was appointed, she had every organization wanting to jump in and work with her. But I'd like to close by inviting her and Commissioner Mugisha just to give the one word of either restraint or what's the one thing you would like funders who are part of this conversation today to respect? What is the one thing you would like them to do in their behavior vis-a-vis government? Minister Kaba.
That's a difficult one. I would like, in as much as I strongly believe we need more leaders with skin in the game in our governments, especially on our continent. I would like to see also donors with skin in the game. What do I mean by that? I think I would like to see donors, also being more accountable to what they do, and really be listening to us, listening to our needs, trying to understand also how things work. I think we've come a long way, though. Let's not be negative here. I've been working. I think I think we have made progress, but more than that. Thank you.
That's terrific. Commissioner Mugisha.
From my end. Funders just need to be transparent.
Transparent.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. That is brilliant. We began this conversation today with Malado Kaba telling us that governments need to be in the driving seat. And as I heard that, I remembered sitting in the back of a chauffeured vehicle in Kampala, actually, with an IMF official who said to me, we need to make sure the government is in the driving seat. And I looked at the possibly underpaid driver who was driving us and thought, no, that's not where you want governments to be, right? There is a wonderful ambiguity to the expression about who is in the driving seat. And I think this panel has really drawn out the ambiguities of whether you want to be in the driving seat, the commanding position, where you're going to be. But can I close by inviting you all to download and use the Journey tool, which will be in the chat column, to support your further conversations. I know, and to join your hands together to thank Melissa and Betsy and their organizations, VillageReach and Emerging Public Leaders, for hosting today's panel. It's been hugely fun. And last, but certainly not least, a huge thank you to the brilliant panelists. Thank you.